Hi, my beautiful family. With heavy hearts and tears in my eyes, welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. Today, I won't say much, just one thing. I'm deeply disappointed. When I needed you the most, you weren't there. You broke my heart. I gave you my soul, my love, my stories. But when it was my turn to need you, you left me. Mr. James will tell you why this happened.
Hi, my beautiful family. This is James Peters. Many of you know me. I've worked here before, side by side with my brother, Mr. Peters. Today, I return not just as a voice, but as a heart that's hurting. Because Mr. Peters is in deep pain. He's going through one of the hardest moments of his life, and sadly, it's not just what's happening around him. It's the silence from those he loves most. You, his family. Yesterday, Mr. Peters gave Ben a chance. Ben is like a little brother to us. But the response, it broke Mr. Peters. The love was missing. The connection was gone. It was the lowest performing day in this channel's entire history, and it hurt. But what's even more painful is that Mr. Peters feels abandoned. Yes, he's angry, not just at what happened, but at how many walked away when he needed you the most. I looked into his eyes, and I saw the tears. Tears of a man who has poured his soul into this family for years. Tears of someone who never stopped giving, but now feels forgotten. Please don't let him down. He needs you now more than ever. Watch the videos till the end. Don't leave in the middle. 90% of our views have dropped. YouTube is pushing Mr. Peters down, and the only thing that can lift him up is you. I'm not here to blame. I'm here to rebuild, with love, with loyalty, and with you by my side. Give me one chance to carry his voice forward. Together, we can bring back the light. Please stand with Mr. Peters. Let him feel your love again. With all my heart, James Peters. The fluorescent lights of Morrison and Associates cast harsh shadows across Helen Laura's face as she packed her belongings into a cardboard box, her hands trembling not from the cold, but from the humiliation burning through her chest like acid. 20 minutes ago, she had been a respected graphic designer with 3 years of exemplary service. Now she was unemployed, a single black mother fired for bringing her child to work during a school emergency. I want you out of this building in 15 minutes, Mr. Morrison had sneered, his face twisted with disgust as he glared at 7-year-old Zion, who sat quietly in the corner of Helen's cubicle, clutching his school backpack. This is a professional environment, not a daycare center. We can't have people like you disrupting our workplace. The words had hit Helen like physical blows, each syllable designed to wound and degrade. She had wanted to scream, to defend herself, to explain that Zion's school had called with an emergency, that he had fallen during recess and needed to be picked up immediately, that her babysitter was out of town, that she had nowhere else to turn. But the cold satisfaction in Morrison's eyes told her that explanations were useless. He had been looking for a reason to get rid of her ever since she had quietly reported his inappropriate comments about her body to HR 6 months ago. "Mama?" Zion's soft voice cut through her thoughts, his large brown eyes filled with confusion and fear. At 7 years old, he was wise beyond his years, having learned to read the tension in adult voices, to make himself invisible when trouble stirred. Are we in trouble? Helen's heart shattered into 1,000 pieces as she knelt beside her son, her professional blazer already soaked with tears. She couldn't stop. "No, baby," she whispered, pulling him close and breathing in the sweet scent of his hair, trying to memorize this moment before their world completely fell apart. "We're not in trouble. Sometimes grown-ups make unfair decisions, but that doesn't mean we did anything wrong." But even as she spoke the words, Helen felt the crushing weight of reality settling on her shoulders. Without this job, they would lose their tiny apartment within the month. The $300 in her savings account wouldn't even cover groceries for 2 weeks, let alone rent, utilities, and Zion's school supplies. She had already pawned her mother's wedding ring, the only thing of value she owned, to pay for Zion's school shoes last month. The security guard appeared at her cubicle, his expression uncomfortable but resolute. "Ma'am, I need to escort you out now." Helen stood on unsteady legs, lifting the cardboard box with one arm while taking Zion's small hand with the other. As they walked through the maze of cubicles, she felt the eyes of her former colleagues following them, some filled with sympathy, others with the cruel satisfaction of office politics. Jessica from accounting mouthed, "I'm sorry," as they passed, but Helen barely registered it through the fog of her devastation. The elevator ride to the ground floor felt eternal, the fluorescent lights above humming with the same cold indifference that had characterized her dismissal. Zion pressed closer to her side, his free hand clutching the straps of his backpack so tightly his knuckles had turned white. When the elevator doors opened, Helen's heart sank even further. Outside the glass lobby doors, she could see the storm that had been threatening all afternoon had finally arrived with a vengeance. Rain poured from the dark Seattle sky in torrents, driven sideways by winds that rattled the building's windows. She had taken the bus to work that morning, never imagining she would be leaving as an unemployed single mother with nowhere to go. "Ma'am?" The security guard's voice was gentler now, perhaps recognizing the impossible situation before them. "Do you need me to call you a cab?" Helen almost laughed at the absurdity. A cab? With what money? The bus fare home would take her last $5, leaving them with enough money for maybe 2 days of food if she was careful. "No, thank you," she managed, her voice barely audible above the storm outside. "We'll be fine." But they wouldn't be fine, and they both knew it. Stepping into the storm felt like stepping into hell itself. The rain was ice-cold and merciless, soaking through Helen's blazer within seconds and turning her carefully styled hair into wet tendrils that clung to her face. The wind whipped around them with such fury that Zion stumbled, his small body no match for nature's assault. Helen pulled him closer, using her own body as a shield while trying to protect the cardboard box containing her personal items from the office. Photos of Zion, a small, succulent plant he had given her for Mother's Day, her favorite coffee mug with "World's Best Mom" painted in crooked letters, such tiny things, but they represented the life she had tried so hard to build for them both. The bus stop was 3 blocks away, and by the time they reached it, both mother and son were soaked and shivering. The small shelter offered little protection from the wind-driven rain, and Helen realized they would have to wait 20 minutes for the next bus. Zion's lips were turning blue, his thin jacket useless against the cold. Helen pulled him onto her lap on the metal bench, wrapping her arms around him and sharing what little warmth she had. Her cardboard box sat beside them, slowly dissolving in the relentless downpour. "Mama," Zion whispered, his voice barely audible above the howling wind. "I'm sorry I ruined your job. I'm sorry I made you lose everything." Those words, spoken with the devastating honesty that only children possess, broke something fundamental inside Helen. Her beautiful, brilliant son, who had done nothing wrong except exist, was blaming himself for the cruelty of adults. She pressed her face against his wet hair, her tears mixing with the rainwater on her cheeks. "Listen to me, Zion," she said, pulling back to look into his eyes, her hands framing his small face. "You did not ruin anything. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me. You are my heart, my soul, my reason for living. Don't you ever, ever blame yourself for what happened today. But if I hadn't gotten hurt at school, then I would have found another reason to love you just as much," Helen interrupted, her voice fierce with maternal protection. "Baby, some people in this world don't understand what love looks like. They don't understand that being your mama is the greatest honor of my life. But that's their problem, not ours." As she spoke, Helen became aware of a presence nearby, A black SUV with tinted windows had pulled up to the curb just beyond the bus stop, its engine running, its headlights cutting through the storm like beacons. She couldn't see the driver through the dark glass, but something about the vehicle's stillness made her skin prickle with awareness. For a moment, fear crept up her spine. Here they were, vulnerable and alone, with nowhere to run if danger approached. But the SUV simply sat there, silent as a guardian in the storm, and Helen found herself oddly comforted by its presence. "Mama, I'm scared," Zion whispered, his small body trembling against hers. "I know, baby," Helen replied, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "I'm scared too, but we're going to be okay. I promise you we're going to survive this. We're going to be stronger than they think we are." Inside the SUV, Aaron DeGroat sat behind the wheel, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. He had been driving home from a late meeting when he witnessed the scene at the bus stop. A woman and child forced into the storm without shelter. Something about their situation struck him with unexpected force, compelling him to pull over. Now, seeing them up close, the woman's protective embrace, the child's quiet vulnerability, the dignity they maintained despite their circumstances, Aaron felt something shift in his chest. The woman was striking, but it was more than physical beauty. It was her fierce tenderness, the love radiating from every gesture as she comforted her son. 25 years ago, Aaron had been that child, scared, cold, dependent on a mother who fought impossible battles just to keep them alive. He remembered the taste of shame, the weight of adult problems pressing down on small shoulders, the way strangers looked through him as if he didn't exist. But this woman, this mother, she saw her son. She loved him with a fierceness that took Aaron's breath away. As the bus finally approached, its headlights barely penetrating the storm, Aaron made a decision that would change 3 lives forever. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out one of his personal business cards, writing quickly on the back before stepping out into the rain. He approached carefully, not wanting to frighten them further, and when Helen looked up with startled eyes, he pressed the card into her hand. "Tomorrow will be better," he said simply, his voice barely audible above the storm. Before Helen could respond, he was gone, disappearing back into his SUV and driving away into the night, leaving behind only questions and the faintest hope that perhaps, in a world full of cruelty, there might still be angels in disguise. Chapter 2. The Mysterious Savior. 2 weeks had passed since that terrible night in the storm, and Helen Laura's world had crumbled steadily. The eviction notice on their apartment door gave her 5 days to vacate or face removal by the sheriff's department. She stood in the narrow hallway of their building, staring at the red lettering, while Zion slept peacefully in their tiny bedroom, unaware that they might soon be homeless. Her savings account showed a balance of $12.37. The food stamps had run out yesterday, and their last meal had been a shared package of ramen noodles that Zion had insisted she eat most of, claiming he wasn't very hungry. At 7 years old, her son was already learning to sacrifice for her, and the knowledge ate at Helen's soul like acid. She had spent every day searching for work, but Morrison and Associates had poisoned her professional reputation. The few interviews she secured always ended with polite smiles and swift rejections. Her savings showed $12.37. The food stamps had run out yesterday. Helen sank onto their threadbare couch, still wearing the same black blazer she had worn to 3 interviews that day, each one more humiliating than the last. Her feet ached in her only pair of professional heels, the ones with the small crack along the left sole that she covered with black nail polish before each outing. She had walked 17 blocks between appointments because she couldn't afford bus fare for the return trips, and her stomach had been growling so loudly during the final interview that she had pretended to cough to cover the sound. As she sat in the semi-darkness of their living room, illuminated only by the flickering streetlight outside their window, Helen allowed herself to think the thoughts she had been pushing away for weeks. What would happen to Zion if she couldn't find work? Would social services take him away from her? Would he be better off with a family who could actually provide for him, who wouldn't force him to share ramen noodles and sleep on a mattress on the floor because they couldn't afford a real bed frame? The thought of losing Zion sent panic racing through her veins like ice water. He was everything to her. Her heart walking around outside her body, her reason for breathing, her motivation to keep fighting when the world seemed determined to crush them both. But love wasn't enough to put food on the table or keep a roof over their heads, and Helen was rapidly running out of options. She reached for the business card the stranger had given her that night in the storm, its edges now soft and worn from the countless times she had handled it over the past 3 weeks. The front was elegant in its simplicity, heavy cardstock with embossed lettering that read DeGroat Enterprises, along with an address in the most prestigious part of downtown Seattle. But it was the message written on the back in bold, masculine handwriting that had kept her from throwing it away. Tomorrow will be better. Call when you're ready for your miracle. A.D. Helen had researched DeGroat Enterprises at the public library. Aaron DeGroat, 32, had built a billion-dollar empire in luxury development. The photos showed a devastatingly handsome man with piercing blue eyes, usually surrounded by politicians and celebrities. The idea that such a man would personally help an unemployed single mother seemed impossible. The idea that such a man would personally seek out an unemployed single mother from the projects seemed absurd. Helen had convinced herself the business card was either a cruel joke or the result of mistaken identity. Wealthy men like Aaron DeGroat didn't rescue women like her. They barely acknowledged their existence. But now, facing homelessness with a 7-year-old child, Helen found herself staring at the card with desperate hope. What did she have left to lose? Her pride had already been shattered beyond repair. Her professional reputation was destroyed. Her savings were gone, and her credit was shot. If this was some elaborate prank, at least she would know for certain. And if by some miracle it was real. The sound of paper sliding under their door interrupted her thoughts. Helen's heart lurched, expecting another notice from the landlord or perhaps a final warning from the utilities company. Instead, she found an envelope made of the most beautiful paper she had ever seen, thick, cream-colored cardstock with a subtle texture that spoke of serious money. Her name was written across the front in the same bold handwriting from the business card. With trembling fingers, Helen opened the envelope and extracted a single sheet of matching paper. The letterhead at the top read, DeGroat Enterprises, in understated elegance, and below it, typed in perfect formatting, was a formal job offer. Ms. Helen Laura, DeGroat Enterprises is pleased to offer you the position of Senior Creative Director, effective immediately. Your starting salary will be $150,000 annually, with full health and dental benefits, 4 weeks paid vacation, and a flexible schedule to accommodate your responsibilities as a mother. Additionally, we are prepared to provide a $25,000 signing bonus to assist with your immediate needs. We believe your talents are precisely what our company needs to reach the next level of creative excellence. Your portfolio speaks for itself, and your character references are impeccable. If you choose to accept this position, please report to the 40th floor of DeGroat Tower tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Ask for Ms. Rodriguez, who will handle your onboarding process. Some angels wear disguises, Miss Laura. Consider this your wings. Respectfully, Aide, Chief Executive Officer. Helen read the letter 3 times before the words began to penetrate her shocked mind. $150,000 annually. More money than she had ever dreamed of earning. More money than her mother had made in 5 years combined. The signing bonus alone would cover 6 months of rent, grocery bills, new clothes for Zion, and maybe even a real bed frame. But surely this was too good to be true. Helen had learned long ago that when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. Rich men didn't hand out six-figure jobs to desperate women they had met briefly in a storm. There had to be a catch, some expectation, some hidden price she would be expected to pay. She thought about the rumors she had heard whispered in break rooms and ladies' restrooms throughout her career. Powerful men who helped beautiful women in exchange for certain favors. Executive assistants who earned their positions on their backs rather than their merit. The casting couch culture that pervaded industries far beyond Hollywood. But something about the tone of the letter felt different, professional, respectful. There was no hint of innuendo, no suggestion of quid pro quo. Just a straightforward job offer that acknowledged her skills and her situation without condescension. Helen walked to Zion's bedroom and peered through the cracked door at her sleeping son. Even in sleep, his face showed the stress of their situation. A slight frown between his eyebrows, his small hands clutched into fists as if ready to fight invisible monsters. He had been having nightmares lately, waking up crying about monsters that wanted to take his mama away. Helen knew the monsters he dreamed about were real: poverty, homelessness, separation, and that she was running out of ways to protect him. Making her decision, Helen returned to the living room and picked up her phone. The number on the business card rang only twice before a warm female voice answered. DeGroat Enterprises, Executive Assistants. This is Maria Rodriguez speaking. Hello, Helen said, her voice steadier than she felt. This is Helen Laura. I received a job offer letter tonight, and I was told to ask for you. Ms. Laura, Maria's voice brightened with genuine warmth. We've been expecting your call. Congratulations on your new position. Are you able to start tomorrow morning? Yes, I think so, Helen stammered, still unable to fully believe this was happening. But I have to ask, is this real? I mean, is this a legitimate job offer? Maria laughed, a sound full of understanding rather than mockery. I know it must seem incredible, Miss Laura, but I assure you this is completely legitimate. Mr. DeGroat doesn't make offers lightly, and when he decides someone belongs in his organization, he moves quickly. Your desk is already set up, your computer is configured, and I have a packet of information ready for your review. Can I ask how he knew about my work? My portfolio. Mr. DeGroat has his ways of identifying exceptional talent, Maria replied diplomatically. He's built this company by recognizing potential that others overlook. You'll find that working for DeGroat Enterprises is unlike anything you've experienced before. We're a family here, Miss Laura, and families take care of each other. After ending the call, Helen sat in stunned silence, the job offer letter trembling in her hands. Part of her wanted to call back and ask more questions, to demand explanations and guarantees. But a larger part, the part that had watched her son pretend not to be hungry, that had seen the fear in his eyes when he asked if they were in trouble, told her to simply accept this miracle for what it was. She walked to her closet and pulled out her best outfit, a navy blue dress she had worn to Zion's school functions, paired with a blazer that only had a small stain near the left pocket. It would have to do for her first day at a billion-dollar company. As she hung the clothes carefully on the bedroom door, Helen allowed herself to imagine a future where Zion never had to apologize for being hungry again, where they lived in a real apartment with heat that worked and a refrigerator full of food. Tomorrow morning she would walk into DeGroat Tower with her head held high and her heart full of hope. She would meet the mysterious man who had chosen to save them, and perhaps she would finally understand why an angel had decided to wear the disguise of a billionaire CEO. For the first time in 3 weeks, Helen Laura fell asleep with a smile on her face, dreaming not of eviction notices and empty bank accounts, but of second chances and the possibility that tomorrow really would be better. Chapter 3. When Lightning Strikes. Aaron DeGroat's private jet touched down at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport at 6:47 a.m., cutting through the morning mist. He had spent the past 3 weeks in Dubai finalizing resort acquisitions, but his mind had been elsewhere. Every business meeting had been overshadowed by the memory of a woman and child in a storm. As his driver navigated toward downtown Seattle, Aaron checked his phone obsessively, wondering if she had responded to his offer. Maria Rodriguez had been sending updates, the job offer delivered, the envelope beautiful as requested. But Helen Laura hadn't called yet, and Aaron felt his carefully constructed plan slipping away. Aaron had built DeGroat Enterprises from nothing, transforming a construction loan into a billion-dollar empire through determination and strategic thinking. He had never failed at anything he truly wanted. But this was different. This wasn't about money or acquisitions. This was about a moment of recognition that had shaken him. 25 years ago, Aaron had been that child in the storm. His mother, Sarah DeGroat, had worked 3 jobs after his father abandoned them. He remembered sitting in office waiting rooms while she cleaned buildings at night, remembered her jacket wrapped around him at cold bus stops, remembered her fierce promise that someday things would be better. Sarah had died when Aaron was 15, her body finally succumbing to the stress and exhaustion of fighting impossible battles for too many years. He had been placed in foster care, where a kind family named the Lawsons had given him stability and opportunity, but the damage was done. The boy who had once trusted in promises of someday had hardened into a man who trusted only in his own ability to create the world he wanted to live in. Until 3 weeks ago, when he had seen Helen Laura protecting her son with the same fierce tenderness his mother had shown him, Aaron had believed he was incapable of the kind of love that demanded sacrifice. He had dated extensively, beautiful women who moved in his social circles, intelligent professionals who understood the demands of his lifestyle, even a few celebrities who enjoyed the challenge of conquering Seattle's most eligible bachelor. But none of them had ever made him feel anything deeper than mild affection mixed with physical attraction. Watching Helen in that storm had awakened something in Aaron that he had thought died with his mother. The protective instinct that made him want to shield her from every hardship, the fierce admiration for her strength and dignity in the face of crushing circumstances, the almost desperate need to be worthy of the kind of love she showed her son. It was overwhelming and terrifying and absolutely necessary. The elevator ride to the 40th floor of DeGroat Tower felt eternal, even though Aaron knew every detail of the building by heart. He had designed much of it himself, insisting on floor-to-ceiling windows that offered panoramic views of Elliott Bay, imported Italian marble that gleamed like mirrors, and artwork that spoke to both sophistication and warmth. But today, none of his usual pride in his achievements registered. Today, his entire focus was centered on whether a certain new employee would be sitting at her desk in the creative department. Mr. DeGroat? Maria Rodriguez rose from her station outside his office as the elevator doors opened, her warm smile immediately telling him everything he needed to know. "Welcome home. I trust your flight was comfortable." "She's here," Aaron said, not bothering with pleasantries. It wasn't a question. "She is," Maria confirmed, her dark eyes sparkling with something that looked suspiciously like matchmaking satisfaction. "Started at 9 sharp, just as instructed. She's absolutely lovely, Mr. DeGroat. And her work, I've never seen anything quite like it. Ms. Chen from the creative department says she produced 3 campaign concepts before lunch that are better than anything they've developed in the past year." Aaron felt something tight in his chest loosen slightly. Of course, Helen was talented. He had researched her extensively before making his offer, had somehow acquired samples of her work from Morrison and Associates that showed a creative vision far beyond what her previous salary had reflected. But talent without opportunity was just potential, and Aaron was profoundly grateful that she was already proving herself worthy of the chance he had given her. "Where is she now?" he asked, already moving toward the interior offices. "Conference room C," Maria replied, falling into step beside him. "The creative team is presenting their quarterly review, and Ms. Laura is scheduled to share her initial project proposals at 3:30. Aaron changed direction immediately, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the marble floor with purpose. Conference room C was located in the heart of the creative department, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling glass that would allow him to observe without being observed. He had watched countless presentations from that vantage point, evaluating employees and strategies with the cold objectivity that had made him successful. But nothing could have prepared him for the moment he saw Helen Laura again. She sat at the far end of the oval conference table, her posture perfectly straight, her hands folded calmly in front of a leather portfolio that Aaron recognized as one of the welcome gifts Maria had arranged for new employees. She was wearing a navy blue dress that somehow managed to look both professional and elegant, despite clearly being off the rack, paired with a blazer that had seen better days but was pressed and spotless. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek bun that emphasized the graceful line of her neck, and her makeup was subtle but flawless. But it wasn't her physical beauty that stopped Aaron in his tracks. It was the quiet confidence radiating from her posture, the way she listened intently to every speaker without fidgeting or checking her phone, the small smile that curved her lips when one of her new colleagues made a particularly insightful point. This was a woman who belonged in this room, who had always belonged in rooms like this, despite whatever circumstances had conspired to keep her from reaching her potential until now. As Aaron watched, Helen opened her portfolio and began arranging materials for her presentation. Her movements were economical and graceful, each gesture speaking to a mind that was organized and detail-oriented. When she glanced up to smile at something her supervisor said, Aaron felt his breath catch in his throat. Her smile was radiant, the kind of genuine warmth that couldn't be faked or purchased, the kind that made everyone around her feel a little more hopeful about the world. "Mr. de Groot?" Maria's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you all right?" Aaron realized he had been standing motionless for several minutes, staring through the glass like a man hypnotized. "She's perfect," he murmured, not caring that Maria could hear the wonder in his voice. "Yes, sir," Maria agreed softly. "She is." "Has she mentioned me? Asked about meeting me?" "She's asked a few questions about company hierarchy and reporting structures," Maria replied diplomatically. "But she seems focused on establishing herself professionally before seeking out executive introductions. Very wise approach, if you ask me." Aaron nodded, though he felt an irrational disappointment that Helen hadn't shown more curiosity about the man who had rescued her from homelessness. Of course, she was probably still processing the dramatic change in her circumstances, still wondering if this opportunity was too good to be true. The last thing she needed was pressure from the CEO to acknowledge a debt she might not even realize she owed. As he watched, Helen stood to begin her presentation, her movements fluid and confident, despite what Aaron imagined must be significant nervousness. She smiled at her audience, a room full of colleagues she had known for less than 8 hours, and began speaking in a voice that was melodious and assured. "Good afternoon, everyone. I want to start by saying how grateful I am to be here, and how impressed I've been by the collaborative spirit I've encountered today. In my previous position, creative development was often a solitary process, but the team dynamic here has already inspired ideas I never would have reached on my own." Aaron felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with his company and everything to do with the woman presenting. She was gracious without being obsequious, confident without being arrogant. She acknowledged her newcomer status while establishing her credibility, setting the perfect tone for what was clearly going to be an impressive presentation. For the next 20 minutes, Aaron stood transfixed as Helen unveiled 3 marketing campaigns that were nothing short of brilliant. Her first concept reimagined luxury travel marketing for millennials, using augmented reality and social media integration to create immersive experiences that went far beyond traditional advertising. Her second proposal targeted the emerging market of sustainable luxury, positioning de Groot Properties as leaders in environmental responsibility without sacrificing elegance or comfort. Her third campaign was a masterclass in emotional marketing, using storytelling techniques to create personal connections between potential guests and the de Groot brand. Each presentation was accompanied by mock-ups that looked professionally produced, despite the fact that she had created them in a single morning using basic software. Her research was thorough, her market analysis was sophisticated, and her creative vision was exactly the kind of innovative thinking that separated industry leaders from followers. When she finished, the conference room erupted in spontaneous applause, a reaction Aaron had never witnessed in response to a quarterly review presentation. Helen's cheeks flushed with pleasure and surprise, and Aaron could see tears of gratitude glistening in her eyes as her new colleagues praised her work. "Exceptional," declared James Chen, the creative department director. "These concepts are exactly what we need to differentiate ourselves in an increasingly crowded market. Ms. Laura, I'd like to discuss implementing at least 2 of these campaigns in our next fiscal quarter." "I'd be honored," Helen replied, her voice steady despite the emotion Aaron could see in her expression. "I have some additional thoughts on execution strategies that I'd love to share once I've had more time to familiarize myself with our current client base." As the meeting began to disperse, Aaron found himself faced with a dilemma. Everything in his business instincts told him to introduce himself immediately, to claim credit for recognizing Helen's potential and bringing her into his organization. But something deeper, the same instinct that had compelled him to help her in the first place, warned him that rushing this connection could destroy something precious before it had a chance to develop naturally. Helen Laura was not the desperate woman he had rescued from a storm 3 weeks ago. She was a talented professional who had just proven herself worthy of her position through merit rather than charity. The last thing Aaron wanted was for her to feel that her success was tainted by obligation, or that her employment came with expectations beyond professional excellence. As Helen gathered her materials and prepared to leave the conference room, her eyes swept the surrounding offices. For just a moment, her gaze met Aaron's through the glass, and time seemed to stop. He saw recognition flicker in her expression, not of his identity, but of something deeper. Her awareness that someone was watching her, someone whose attention felt different from the casual observation of colleagues or supervisors. Aaron felt electricity race through his veins as their eyes held for what couldn't have been more than 3 seconds but felt like an eternity. Then Helen looked away, a slight flush coloring her cheeks, and Aaron knew with absolute certainty that whatever had begun in that storm 3 weeks ago was far from over. Tomorrow, he decided. Tomorrow he would find a reason to meet Helen Laura officially, professionally, without any reference to their previous encounter. He would give her time to establish herself, to feel secure in her position, to trust that her place in his organization was based on merit rather than charity. But tonight, Aaron would go home to his penthouse overlooking the city and dream of brown eyes that held both strength and vulnerability, of a smile that could light up a room, and of the growing certainty that he had found the woman who could make him whole. Chapter 4. The moment truth reveals itself. Helen's phone buzzed at 7:23 a.m. with the kind of call every working parent dreads. Mrs. Patterson, her babysitter, was crying about her mother's heart attack. She was rushing to the hospital and wouldn't be available for at least a week. Helen sat on the edge of her bed, watching Zion sleep peacefully, and felt familiar panic rising. It had been exactly 2 weeks since she started at de Groot Enterprises, 2 weeks of fulfilling work where her colleagues respected her ideas and her supervisor had approved 3 campaign proposals. The work was challenging but rewarding, and the salary had allowed her to create the stable home she'd always wanted for Zion. But now, staring at her reflection in their new bathroom mirror, Helen felt old fears returning. What if bringing Zion to work proved she wasn't de Groot material? What if her mysterious benefactor decided single mothers were too complicated? Mama? Zion appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes, his Spider-Man pajamas wrinkled from a night of peaceful dreams. At 7 years old, he was becoming more perceptive about adult emotions, and Helen could see him reading the tension in her posture. Is everything okay? Helen forced a smile, the same protective mask she had worn through countless crises over the years. Mrs. Patterson had a family emergency, sweetheart, so you're going to come to work with me today. Remember how we talked about using our inside voices and staying in Mama's office? Zion's face lit up with excitement rather than the fear Helen had expected. Really? I get to see where you work. Can I meet your friends? Will there be other kids there? His innocent enthusiasm broke Helen's heart and strengthened her resolve simultaneously. This beautiful, brilliant child deserved a mother who didn't live in constant fear of losing everything. He deserved stability, security, and the confidence that came from knowing his parents' love was enough to overcome any obstacle. Yes, you can meet my friends, Helen said, kneeling down to hug him close. But remember, this is Mama's workplace, so we need to be respectful and quiet. Can you do that for me? I'll be the best kid ever, Zion promised solemnly, his small arms tight around her neck. I won't mess up your job, Mama. I promise. Those words, so similar to what he had said that terrible night in the rain, made Helen's chest ache with fierce protectiveness. She pulled back to look into his earnest brown eyes, eyes so much like her own that people often remarked on their resemblance. Zion, listen to me very carefully, she said, her voice gentle but firm. You could never mess up my job just by existing. You are the best part of my life, and any place that doesn't understand that isn't a place we want to be anyway. Okay? He nodded seriously, though Helen could see he didn't quite believe her. The memories of that night 3 weeks ago were still fresh for both of them. The humiliation, the fear, the way cruel words had made them both feel small and unwanted. But Helen was determined that today would be different. She was a valued employee now, not a desperate woman begging for scraps. Her work spoke for itself, and surely any reasonable employer would understand that emergencies happen to working parents. An hour later, Helen walked through the gleaming lobby of de Groot Tower, with Zion's small hand tucked securely in hers, her laptop bag slung over her shoulder, and her son's backpack filled with quiet activities and snacks. She had dressed carefully in her best outfit, a charcoal gray dress that made her feel powerful and confident, paired with the new blazer she had bought with her employee discount. Zion looked adorable in his khaki pants and blue button-down shirt, his hair neatly combed and his Spider-Man backpack adding just enough personality to keep him from looking like a tiny businessman. The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt eternal, with Helen's stomach churning more with each passing floor. She had called ahead to explain the situation to her supervisor, James Chen, who had been understanding and accommodating. But phone calls were different from reality, and Helen knew that having a child in a professional environment could be disruptive no matter how well-behaved that child was. Wow, Zion breathed as the elevator doors opened to reveal the expansive creative department with its floor-to-ceiling windows and stunning views of Elliott Bay. Mama, this is like a castle in the sky. His wonder was infectious, and Helen felt some of her tension ease as several of her colleagues looked up from their workstations with warm smiles. The open plan office was designed to encourage collaboration and creativity, with comfortable seating areas scattered throughout, and artwork that spoke to both sophistication and innovation. "Good morning, Helen," called Sarah Martinez from the graphic design team, waving cheerfully. "And you must be the famous Zion we've heard so much about." Helen felt a rush of gratitude as other team members gathered around to meet her son, their genuine interest and kindness immediately putting both Helen and Zion at ease. These people weren't judging her for bringing her child to work. They were welcoming him as part of the de Groot family that Maria Rodriguez had promised they would become. "He's so handsome," gushed Lisa Wong from the marketing department. "Those eyes. He's going to be a heartbreaker when he grows up." Zion beamed under the attention, his natural charm and good manners winning over Helen's colleagues within minutes. He shook hands politely when introduced, answered questions about his favorite subjects in school, and even complimented the artwork hanging throughout the office with observations that showed a surprisingly mature aesthetic sense. "Can I see where you work, Mama?" Zion asked, tugging gently on Helen's hand. Helen's workstation was located in a prime spot near the windows, with a view that never failed to take her breath away. She had personalized the space with a small succulent plant, a framed photo of Zion from his first day of second grade, and a few art supplies that helped her visualize campaign concepts. It wasn't much, but it represented everything she had never dared to hope for: respect, opportunity, and the chance to use her talents in meaningful ways. Zion settled into the guest chair beside Helen's desk, with his backpack full of activities, spreading out coloring books and puzzles with the kind of organizational skills that always amazed Helen. He had learned early to be self-sufficient and entertaining, skills that no 7-year-old should need to develop, but that had served them both well during their most difficult times. For the next 2 hours, Helen worked on finalizing a presentation for a potential new client, while Zion colored quietly beside her, occasionally asking for help with a difficult word in his reading book or sharing his artistic creations. It was exactly the kind of peaceful, productive morning Helen had hoped for, and she began to relax into the rhythm of having her two worlds, professional and maternal, coexisting harmoniously. But at 11:47 a.m., everything changed. Helen was deep in concentration, reviewing market research data for her presentation, when she became aware of a presence nearby. She looked up to find a tall man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit standing a few feet from her workstation, his piercing blue eyes fixed on Zion with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. Aaron de Groot was even more imposing in person than he appeared in the company photos Helen had studied online. He radiated the kind of quiet authority that came from building an empire through vision and determination, but there was something else in his demeanor, a gentleness that seemed at odds with his reputation as a ruthless businessman. "Mr. de Groot," Helen stammered, rising quickly from her chair and feeling her cheeks flush with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry. I know having children in the office isn't ideal, but my babysitter had an emergency and—" "Please," Aaron said softly, raising one hand to stop her explanation. His voice was deep and warm, with an undertone that seemed familiar, though Helen couldn't place why. "Don't apologize. May I?" He gestured toward the empty chair at her workstation. Helen nodded mutely, her heart racing with a mixture of nervousness and something else she couldn't name. Aaron de Groot, billionaire CEO, one of the most powerful men in Seattle, was asking permission to sit at her desk like any normal colleague. It was surreal and intimidating and somehow comforting all at the same time. Aaron lowered himself into the chair with fluid grace, immediately bringing himself to Zion's eye level. Helen watched in amazement as her son looked up from his coloring book to study this newcomer with the serious expression he reserved for adults who might be important. "Hello," Aaron said gently. "You must be Zion. I've heard wonderful things about you." "Hello, sir," Zion replied politely, sitting up straighter in his chair. "Are you my mama's boss?" Aaron's mouth curved into what might have been the beginning of a smile. "I suppose I am, in a way. But more importantly, I'm someone who understands what it's like to be exactly where you are right now. Helen felt her breath catch as Aaron continued, his voice taking on a quality that spoke of shared experience and deep empathy. 25 years ago, I was you, Aaron said, his blue eyes never leaving Zion's face. My mama brought me to her jobs when she had nowhere else to turn. I sat in chairs just like yours, trying to be invisible and well-behaved, carrying art supplies in my backpack to keep myself occupied while she worked incredibly hard to take care of us both. The words hit Helen like a physical blow, memories of that night in the storm flooding back with startling clarity. The black SUV that had appeared out of nowhere, the stranger who had given her a business card in the rain, whose face had been hidden by darkness and storm clouds, the handwriting on the back of the card that had promised her a miracle. You, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of office conversation around them. You were the man in the SUV. Aaron's eyes met hers then, and Helen saw confirmation in their blue depths, along with something else, something that looked like hope mixed with vulnerability. I was that scared little boy once, he said, quietly. And you, his voice caught slightly. You were the mother I watched protect her child with such fierce love that it broke something open in my chest. Zion looked back and forth between the adults, clearly sensing the emotional undercurrents but not understanding their source. Mama, do you know each other? Helen couldn't speak, her mind reeling as puzzle pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. The mysterious job offer, the salary that seemed too good to be true, the immediate acceptance at DeGroat Enterprises despite her damaged professional reputation. Aaron DeGroat hadn't hired her out of some abstract sense of corporate social responsibility. He had saved her because he had seen himself in Zion, had recognized the echo of his own childhood in their desperate situation. Your mama, Aaron said to Zion, though his eyes remained locked on Helen's face, is one of the strongest, most talented women I've ever met. She's worked incredibly hard to take care of you, and she deserves every opportunity that comes her way. I know, Zion said solemnly. My mama is the best mama in the whole world. She always makes sure I have everything I need, even when things are scary. Aaron's expression softened further, and Helen saw him blink rapidly as if fighting back tears. She is extraordinary, he agreed. And so are you, Zion. Any company would be lucky to have both of you as part of their family. The word family hung in the air between them, loaded with meanings that Helen was only beginning to understand. This wasn't just about employment or corporate charity. This was about recognition. One survivor acknowledging another, one person who had overcome impossible odds, reaching out to someone fighting the same battles he had once fought. Mr. DeGroat, Helen began, her voice stronger now, though her hands were trembling slightly. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to thank you for— You don't thank family, Aaron interrupted gently. You just let them love you. The simple words shattered something inside Helen that she hadn't even realized was broken. For years, she had carried the weight of single parenthood alone, convinced that accepting help was a sign of weakness, that she had to prove her worth through independence and self-reliance. But looking at Aaron, this powerful, successful man who had never forgotten where he came from, Helen realized that strength sometimes meant allowing others to care. Can I show you my drawing? Zion asked Aaron, apparently deciding that any adult who made his mama look less worried was worth getting to know better. I would love to see it, Aaron replied, and Helen watched in wonder as this billionaire CEO leaned forward to examine her 7-year-old's artwork with the same attention he probably gave to multi-million-dollar business proposals. As she watched the two most important people in her world connect over a picture of Spider-Man saving a family from a storm cloud, Helen felt something shift inside her chest, something that felt suspiciously like the beginning of hope. Chapter 5. Fire and Ice. The rest of that day passed in a blur of stolen glances and electric moments that left Helen's nerves humming with awareness she hadn't felt in years. After Aaron's revelation about their connection, he had stayed for another hour, charming Zion with stories about building his first treehouse and listening with genuine interest as her son explained the complex mythology behind his superhero drawings. But it was the way Aaron looked at her, with an intensity that seemed to see straight through to her soul, that left Helen feeling unsteady and breathless. 3 days later, Helen was still replaying every word of their conversation, analyzing every gesture and expression for hidden meanings. She had thrown herself into her work with renewed passion, producing campaign concepts that earned praise from colleagues and approval from supervisors. But underneath her professional success ran an undercurrent of anticipation that made her skin feel too tight and her heart beat too fast. It was during her lunch break on Thursday, as she sat in the company's rooftop garden with a salad she was too nervous to eat, that Aaron found her again. "Mind if I join you?" His voice came from directly behind her, rich and warm in the afternoon sunshine, and Helen nearly dropped her fork as she turned to find him standing there with his own lunch tray and that devastating smile that had been haunting her dreams. "Of course not," Helen managed, though her voice came out slightly breathless. "It's your building, after all." Aaron settled into the chair across from her, his movements fluid and controlled, like a predator that knew exactly how dangerous he was. Today he wore a navy blue suit that looked like it cost more than Helen's monthly rent, with a crisp white shirt that emphasized the strong column of his throat and a silk tie that brought out the impossible blue of his eyes. "How are you settling in?" he asked, his tone casual and professional. But Helen caught the underlying current of something deeper. "Any concerns or questions about your position here?" "Everything has been wonderful," Helen replied honestly. "More than wonderful, actually. I've never worked anywhere that felt so collaborative and supportive. Your employees really do feel like family." "That's always been important to me," Aaron said, taking a bite of his sandwich without breaking eye contact. "I believe that when people feel valued and secure, they do their best work. When they feel like they belong." The word belong hung between them, heavy with implication, and Helen felt heat creep up her neck, despite the cool breeze from Elliott Bay. There was something about the way Aaron spoke, the careful choice of words, the subtle emphasis on certain phrases that made even innocent conversation feel charged with meaning. "Your son," Aaron continued, his voice dropping slightly, "is remarkable. Intelligent, well-mannered, clearly loved. You've done an incredible job raising him." "Thank you," Helen whispered, overwhelmed by the genuine admiration in his voice. "He's everything to me." "I can see that," Aaron said softly. "The way you look at him, the way you protect him, it reminds me of my mother. She used to say that love was the only thing in the world that could multiply by being divided." Helen felt tears prick her eyes at the simple beauty of the sentiment. "She sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Aaron agreed, though Helen caught a flash of old pain in his expression. "She died when I was 15. Cancer. By then, the stress and exhaustion of fighting impossible battles had worn her down to nothing." "I'm sorry," Helen said, reaching across the table to touch his hand before she could stop herself. The contact sent electricity shooting up her arm, and she saw Aaron's pupils dilate slightly in response. "That must have been devastating." "It was," Aaron admitted, his hand turning under hers so their palms touched, skin against skin. "But it also made me who I am. Every success, every dollar earned, every life I'm able to touch, it's all for her. And for the scared little boy I used to be." The raw honesty in his voice made Helen's chest ache with sympathy and something else, something that felt dangerously like attraction. This wasn't the polished businessman the media portrayed or the ruthless CEO his competitors feared. This was a man who had survived trauma and transformed pain into purpose, who understood struggle in a way that most people in his position never could. "You saved us," Helen said quietly, her thumb moving unconsciously across his knuckles. "That night in the storm, Zion and I had nowhere to go. We were about to lose everything." "You saved yourselves," Aaron corrected, his voice rough with emotion. "I just recognized strength when I saw it. I saw a woman who would rather stand in a storm than compromise her integrity. I saw a mother who would protect her child with her life. I saw—" He paused, his free hand reaching up to trace the line of her jaw with infinite gentleness. "The most beautiful thing I've ever witnessed." Helen's breath caught as Aaron's fingertips brushed her skin, leaving trails of fire in their wake. She should pull away, should maintain professional boundaries, should remember that this man was her boss, and she was a single mother who couldn't afford to make mistakes. But the way he was looking at her, like she was precious and powerful and perfectly imperfect, made rational thought impossible. "Aaron," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if it was a protest or a plea. He leaned closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her want to bury her face in his neck and breathe him in. Close enough that she could see gold flecks in his blue eyes, could count the dark lashes that framed them, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "You didn't just lose a job that night," he murmured, his voice low and intimate. "You found your destiny. We found each other." The words sent heat spiraling through Helen's body, pooling low in her belly and making her acutely aware of every inch of skin beneath her conservative blouse. Aaron's thumb traced across her lower lip, and she couldn't suppress the soft gasp that escaped her. "This is crazy," she breathed, even as her body swayed toward his like a flower turning toward the sun. "Is it?" Aaron asked, his mouth now close enough to hers that she could feel his breath against her lips. "Or is it the first sane thing either of us has done in years?" Before Helen could answer, before she could think or rationalize or remember all the reasons this was impossible, Aaron's phone buzzed with an urgent text. The spell broke instantly, and Helen jerked backward, her face flaming with embarrassment as she realized how close they had come to kissing in full view of anyone who might have been watching from the windows above. Aaron glanced at his phone with obvious frustration, his jaw tightening as he read the message. "I have to go," he said, his voice rough with unfulfilled desire. "Emergency board meeting, but Helen—" He stood, reaching out to touch her hand one more time. "This isn't over. We need to talk. Really talk." Helen nodded mutely, not trusting her voice to remain steady. She watched Aaron stride away with the confident grace that marked everything he did, his broad shoulders straight despite the obvious tension in his posture. Only when he disappeared through the rooftop door did she allow herself to slump back in her chair, her heart racing and her skin still tingling from his touch. What was she doing? Aaron DeGroat was the most powerful man in Seattle, a billionaire who moved in circles she couldn't even imagine. She was a single mother from the projects who had been homeless less than a month ago. The gulf between their worlds was vast and unbridgeable, and getting involved with her boss, especially this boss, was professional suicide. But even as Helen's rational mind catalogued all the reasons to stay away from Aaron, her body hummed with awareness, and her heart whispered that some connections transcended logic. The way he had looked at her, the tenderness in his touch, the raw honesty in his voice when he spoke about his mother. Those weren't the actions of a man playing games or seeking a temporary distraction. For the rest of the afternoon, Helen tried to focus on her work, but her concentration was shot. Every sound in the hallway made her look up, hoping to see Aaron's familiar silhouette. Every email notification made her pulse spike, wondering if he was reaching out to continue their interrupted conversation. By the time 5 o'clock arrived, her nerves were stretched taut as violin strings. She was packing up her workstation when Maria Rodriguez appeared at her desk, the executive assistant's warm smile somehow managing to look both professional and conspiratorial. "Ms. Laura," Maria said, her voice carefully neutral despite the knowing gleam in her dark eyes. "Mr. de Groot asked me to give you this." She handed Helen an envelope made of the same heavy cream paper that had contained her job offer, Helen's name written across the front in Aaron's distinctive handwriting. Helen's fingers trembled slightly as she accepted it, acutely aware that several of her colleagues were watching the exchange with curious expressions. "Thank you," Helen managed, slipping the envelope into her purse without opening it. Whatever Aaron had written, she needed privacy to process it. The elevator ride to the parking garage felt eternal, and Helen barely made it to her car before tearing open the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper with only a few lines written in Aaron's bold script. "Helen, I know this complicates everything. I know you have every reason to run from this, from me, from the impossibility of what I'm feeling. But 25 years ago, a scared little boy made a promise to himself that someday he would be strong enough to protect the people who mattered. You matter, Helen. You and Zion matter more than anything else in my world. If you're willing to take a chance on something that defies all logic, meet me tomorrow night at 8. The address is below. If you're not ready, if this is too much, too fast, too complicated, I understand. Your job, your security, everything I've promised you and Zion is yours regardless. No strings, no expectations, no consequences. But please don't run from this without giving us a chance to see what we could be together. Yours if you'll have me. Aaron." Below his signature was an address Helen didn't recognize, somewhere in the affluent Queen Anne neighborhood that overlooked the city. As she sat in her car reading his words over and over, Helen felt tears slip down her cheeks, tears of fear and hope and overwhelming gratitude for a man who understood that trust was earned, not demanded. Tomorrow night, she would have to make a choice that could change everything. Tomorrow night, she would have to decide whether to play it safe or take the biggest risk of her life. But tonight, as she drove home to Zion with Aaron's letter pressed against her heart, Helen allowed herself to dream of blue eyes and gentle hands and the revolutionary possibility that she might deserve to be loved by someone extraordinary. Chapter 6. Dangerous Desires. Helen stood in front of her bedroom mirror for the 5th time in 20 minutes, her hands smoothing down the fabric of the black dress she had finally settled on after trying on every remotely appropriate outfit in her modest wardrobe. The dress was simple but elegant, purchased during a rare splurge in her previous life, when she had been invited to a work holiday party she ultimately couldn't attend because of babysitting issues. Now, as she studied her reflection in the soft lamplight of her bedroom, Helen wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her life. Zion was safely settled at her neighbor Mrs. Chen's apartment, happily engrossed in a Marvel movie marathon, and enough pizza to fuel his 7-year-old imagination for hours. Helen had explained that she had a work dinner, which wasn't technically a lie since Aaron was technically her boss, but the guilt of her deception still gnawed at her. She wasn't ready to explain to her son that the mysterious man who had saved them might be interested in more than just professional mentorship. The address Aaron had provided led to a residential building in Queen Anne that took Helen's breath away as she stood on the sidewalk, looking up at its glass and steel facade. This wasn't just luxury housing. This was the kind of place where foreign diplomats and tech billionaires kept their Seattle residences. The doorman who greeted her was polite and professional, clearly expecting her arrival, and the elevator that whisked her to the 42nd floor was lined with mirrors that reflected her nervous energy back at her from every angle. When the elevator doors opened directly into Aaron's penthouse, Helen felt her carefully constructed composure wobble. The space was a masterpiece of modern architecture and masculine elegance, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Elliott Bay and the city lights twinkling below like fallen stars. The furniture was sleek and expensive without being ostentatious. The artwork was museum quality, and the overall effect was both intimidating and somehow deeply personal. Aaron emerged from what appeared to be the kitchen, and Helen's breath caught in her throat. Gone was the formal business attire she was accustomed to seeing him in. Instead, he wore dark jeans that hugged his long legs and a charcoal gray sweater that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the lean strength of his frame. His hair was slightly mussed, as if he had been running his fingers through it, and his feet were bare against the polished hardwood floors. The casual intimacy of his appearance sent heat spiraling through Helen's body, making her acutely aware of how alone they were, how far removed from the professional environment where their relationship had begun. This wasn't CEO Aaron de Groot. This was simply Aaron, the man who had saved her from a storm and who looked at her like she was the answer to a question he had been asking his whole life. "You came," he said softly, his voice carrying a note of wonder that suggested he hadn't been entirely certain she would. "I almost didn't," Helen admitted, her honesty surprising them both. "This is terrifying, Aaron. Everything about this situation defies logic." "The best things usually do," he replied, moving closer with the fluid grace that characterized all his movements. "Can I get you something to drink? Wine? Coffee? Water?" "Wine might be good," Helen said, then immediately second-guessed herself. "Actually, maybe water. I don't want to." She stopped, realizing she was rambling. Aaron's mouth curved into a gentle smile that made her stomach flutter. "Helen, breathe. You're safe here, with me, always." The simple declaration did something to her insides, loosening the knot of anxiety that had been building all day. She followed Aaron to the kitchen, which was a work of art in black granite and stainless steel, and accepted the glass of wine he poured from a bottle that probably cost more than her weekly grocery budget. "This is beautiful," Helen said, gesturing toward the windows where Seattle sparkled beneath them like a jewel. "The view is incredible." "It is tonight," Aaron agreed, but he wasn't looking at the city. His eyes were fixed on her face with an intensity that made her skin feel too warm and her pulse race in places she had almost forgotten existed. They moved to the living room, settling onto opposite ends of a leather sofa that was large enough to seat 6 people comfortably. The distance between them felt both prudent and torturous, close enough that Helen could smell Aaron's cologne, but far enough that she couldn't reach out and touch him without making a deliberate choice to do so. "Tell me about yourself," Aaron said, his voice low and intimate in the softly lit space. "Not the professional version you put on your resume. The real Helen. What do you dream about when you're not being strong for everyone else?" The question caught Helen off guard with its perceptiveness. "I don't think anyone has ever asked me that before," she admitted, taking a sip of wine to buy herself time to think. "What do you mean?" "For the past 7 years, I've been Zion's mother first, and everything else second. Before that, I was someone's wife, trying to be what he needed me to be. I can't remember the last time someone was interested in my dreams that didn't involve providing for my son or advancing my career." Aaron leaned forward slightly, his blue eyes intent on her face. "I'm asking now." Helen felt something loosen in her chest, some protective barrier she had been maintaining without even realizing it. "I used to paint," she said quietly. "Before Zion, before everything got so complicated. I dreamed of having my own gallery someday, of creating art that made people feel something powerful and beautiful. What stopped you?" "Life," Helen said with a rueful smile. "Marriage to a man who thought art was frivolous. Motherhood, the need to pay bills and put food on the table. Practical dreams replaced impossible ones." "Dreams are never impossible," Aaron said fiercely. "They're just delayed." What would you paint now if you could paint anything? Helen closed her eyes, allowing herself to imagine for the first time in years. Storm clouds, she said without thinking. The way they look when they're about to break open and change everything, the beauty in destruction and renewal. When she opened her eyes, Aaron was staring at her with an expression that took her breath away. "You're extraordinary," he said quietly. "The way your mind works, the way you see beauty in chaos, it's breathtaking." "Aaron," Helen whispered, setting down her wine glass with trembling hands. "I know this is crazy," he said, moving closer on the sofa until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "I know all the reasons we shouldn't be here together, but from the moment I saw you in that storm, I haven't been able to think about anything else. You've awakened something in me that I thought was dead." Helen's breath caught as Aaron reached out to trace the line of her cheekbone with fingertips that left trails of fire on her skin. "What if I'm not what you think I am?" she whispered. "What if I disappoint you?" "Impossible," Aaron said firmly, his hand sliding into her hair to cup the nape of her neck. "You're stronger than you know, more beautiful than you realize, and more necessary to me than you could ever imagine." The raw honesty in his voice shattered the last of Helen's defenses. Before she could think or rationalize or remember all the reasons this was dangerous, she found herself leaning into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed as Aaron's thumb traced across her lower lip. "Helen," he murmured, her name a prayer on his lips. "Yes," she breathed, not even sure what she was agreeing to, knowing only that whatever Aaron was offering, she wanted it with a desperation that scared her. Aaron's mouth was inches from hers when the lights suddenly flickered, and the sound of thunder rolled across the city like the voice of an angry god. They both turned toward the windows, where lightning was beginning to dance across the dark sky, illuminating the storm clouds that were gathering with ominous speed. "Looks like we're in for some weather," Aaron said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. As if summoned by his words, the rain began. Not the gentle Seattle drizzle Helen was accustomed to, but a fierce downpour that lashed against the windows with the fury of nature unleashed. The wind howled around the building's corners, creating an otherworldly soundtrack that made the penthouse feel like an island floating above the chaos below. "It's beautiful," Helen said, moving toward the windows to watch the storm's fury play out across the city. "Beautiful and dangerous," Aaron agreed, coming to stand behind her so close that she could feel his breath against her neck. "Like some other things I could mention." Helen turned in the circle of his arms, finding herself trapped between Aaron's body and the cool glass of the window. The storm raged behind her, but all she could focus on was the man in front of her, his blue eyes dark with desire, and his hands gentle on her waist. "Aaron," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the thunder. "Tell me to stop," he murmured, his forehead resting against hers. "Tell me this is moving too fast, that you need time to think. Tell me anything except that you want this as much as I do." But Helen couldn't say any of those things because they would have been lies. The truth was that she had never wanted anything as much as she wanted Aaron's kiss, had never felt anything as powerful as the connection crackling between them like electricity in the storm-charged air. "I can't," she admitted, her hands fisting in the soft material of his sweater. "I can't tell you to stop because I don't want you to. I want this. I want you." Aaron's control snapped like a rubber band stretched too far. His mouth came down on hers with a hunger that had been building for weeks, and Helen felt herself melt against him as lightning flashed outside the windows, illuminating their silhouettes against the storm. The kiss was everything Helen had imagined, and nothing she could have prepared for. Aaron's lips were firm and warm and devastatingly skilled, coaxing responses from her that she had forgotten she was capable of feeling. His hands tangled in her hair, holding her exactly where he wanted her while his mouth explored hers with a thoroughness that left her gasping and clinging to his shoulders for support. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Helen felt like the world had shifted on its axis. Aaron rested his forehead against hers, his hands still cradling her face with infinite gentleness. "I've been wanting to do that since the moment I saw you," he confessed, his voice rough with emotion. "Only since then?" Helen asked breathlessly, surprised by her own boldness. Aaron's laugh was low and delicious, sending vibrations through his chest that Helen could feel where she was pressed against him. "Actually, I think I've been waiting my whole life for you. I just didn't know it until that night in the storm." Another flash of lightning illuminated the room, followed immediately by a crack of thunder, so loud it seemed to shake the building's foundations. Helen gasped and instinctively pressed closer to Aaron, who tightened his arms around her protectively. "Easy," he murmured against her hair. "It's just a storm. It can't hurt you here." But even as Aaron spoke the reassuring words, Helen knew that the real storm wasn't outside. It was inside her, a tempest of emotions and desires that threatened to sweep away every carefully constructed wall she had built around her heart. Being with Aaron felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. "I should go," she whispered, though her body made no move to step away from the shelter of his arms. "Should you?" Aaron asked, his lips brushing against her temple. "Or do you want to stay and see where this storm takes us?" Helen closed her eyes, torn between the safety of retreat and the terrifying possibility of surrender. Outside, the thunder rolled across the city like a promise and a warning, and Helen realized that no matter what choice she made, nothing would ever be the same again. Chapter 7. When Enemies Strike. Helen had been floating on air for 3 days since that night in Aaron's penthouse, their passionate kiss replaying in her mind at the most inappropriate moments during work meetings and conversations with colleagues. She found herself smiling for no apparent reason, humming while she made coffee, and generally radiating the kind of happiness that made Zion look at her with curious eyes and ask if she had found a hidden treasure. In a way, she supposed she had. Aaron had been the perfect gentleman since that stormy evening, not pushing for more than she was ready to give, but making his interest unmistakably clear through a dozen small gestures that left her breathless with anticipation. Fresh orchids appeared on her desk every morning, rare, exotic blooms that must have cost a fortune, and filled her workspace with their intoxicating perfume. He found excuses to visit the creative department, engaging her in conversations about projects and campaigns that somehow always ended with his hand brushing hers or his eyes lingering on her lips, as if remembering their taste. It was during one of these stolen moments on Thursday afternoon that Helen's world began to crumble. She was reviewing final proofs for a luxury resort campaign when her sister Maya burst through the main entrance of De Groot Enterprises, her usually immaculate appearance disheveled and her dark eyes wild with panic. Helen hadn't seen Maya in weeks. Her younger sister lived a lifestyle that rarely intersected with Helen's quiet existence, preferring the nightclub scene and wealthy men who could finance her expensive tastes. "Helen." Maya's voice carried across the open workspace, drawing stares from colleagues who had never seen Helen's family before. "I need to talk to you. Now, it's urgent." Helen rose from her desk, embarrassment heating her cheeks as she noticed the curious looks from her co-workers. Maya was beautiful in the way that turned heads and stopped traffic, tall and slender with the kind of effortless glamour that Helen had never possessed. Today, however, that beauty was marred by smudged mascara and the kind of desperation that spoke of serious trouble. "Maya, what are you doing here?" Helen asked, leading her sister toward a private conference room where they could talk without providing entertainment for the entire office. "How did you even know where I worked?" "I've been dating someone," Maya said without preamble, her voice trembling with an emotion Helen couldn't identify. "Someone powerful, someone who knows about you and your new job and your boss and—" She broke off, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to hold herself together. "Slow down," Helen said gently, closing the conference room door and guiding Maya to a chair. "Start from the beginning. Who have you been dating?" "Victor Russo," Maya whispered, the name falling from her lips like a confession. Helen frowned, the name vaguely familiar but not immediately placing it. "I don't know who that is, Maya. Should I?" "He's Aaron de Groot's biggest competitor," Maya said, her voice growing stronger but more frightened. "He owns Russo Development, and he's been trying to destroy de Groot Enterprises for years. Helen, he's been using me to get information about you, about your relationship with Aaron, about everything." The words hit Helen like physical blows, each revelation worse than the last. "What relationship with Aaron?" she asked carefully, though her heart was already racing with dread. Maya's eyes filled with tears. "Don't lie to me, Helen. Victor knows everything. He knows Aaron hired you personally, knows about that night in the storm, knows that Aaron is falling in love with you. He's been having you watched, having Aaron watched. He knows about the flowers, the private conversations, the night you went to Aaron's penthouse." Helen sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. The idea that her private moments with Aaron had been observed, that her growing feelings had been catalogued and analyzed by a stranger with malicious intent, made her feel violated and exposed. "Maya, how could you?" Helen whispered. "How could you spy on me for some man you're dating?" "I didn't know," Maya cried, fresh tears streaming down her face. "He told me he was interested in business networking, that he wanted to understand the competition. He asked casual questions about your new job, about how grateful you were to Aaron. I thought he was just making conversation. I didn't realize he was—" She stopped, covering her face with her hands. "What else does he know?" Helen asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. Maya looked up, her expression tortured. "He knows about Zion's father, about how Derek left you homeless and pregnant, about how he died before he could make things right. Victor has been digging into your past, Helen, looking for anything he can use against you." Helen felt the blood drain from her face. Derek was a chapter of her life she had closed and buried, a mistake that had cost her everything but given her Zion. The idea that someone was using those painful memories as weapons made her sick to her stomach. "There's more," Maya continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Victor is planning something big. He's been gathering evidence about Aaron's business practices, looking for anything that could be used to destroy him. And he's—" She paused as if the words were too terrible to speak. "What?" Helen demanded, fear making her voice sharp. "He's planning to sue for custody of Zion." The world seemed to tilt on its axis, and Helen gripped the edge of the conference table to keep from falling. "What are you talking about? He has no claim to my son. He doesn't even know Zion." "He's claiming that you're an unfit mother," Maya said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "That you've been using Zion to manipulate wealthy men, that you brought him to work inappropriately, that you're exposing him to dangerous situations by getting involved with your boss. He has photos, Helen. Photos of you and Aaron together, of Zion at the office, of you going to Aaron's penthouse. He's planning to paint you as a gold digger who puts her own interests ahead of her child's welfare." Helen felt as if she were drowning, gasping for air that wouldn't come. Everything good in her life, her job, her growing relationship with Aaron, the security she had finally found for herself and Zion, was being systematically destroyed by a man she had never even met. "But why?" she asked desperately. "What does any of this have to do with Aaron's business?" Maya wiped her eyes, her expression grim. "Victor believes that Aaron is vulnerable because of his feelings for you. He thinks if he can destroy your relationship, if he can take Zion away from you and force you to choose between your son and Aaron, he can break Aaron emotionally and professionally. He's betting that Aaron will make mistakes when he's hurting, that he'll be so focused on protecting you that he won't see the business attacks coming. The conference room door opened suddenly, and Helen looked up to see Aaron standing in the doorway, his face pale and his blue eyes blazing with fury. Behind him stood a man Helen didn't recognize, tall and dark-haired with cold gray eyes and a smile that sent chills down her spine. "Miss Helen Laura," the stranger said, his voice smooth and cultured, with just a hint of an accent she couldn't place. "Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Victor Russo." Aaron stepped protectively in front of Helen, his entire body radiating dangerous energy. "Get out of my building, Russo." "Now." Victor's smile widened, revealing perfectly white teeth that reminded Helen of a shark. Now, Aaron. Is that any way to treat a potential business partner? I was hoping we could have a civilized conversation about our mutual interests." "We have no mutual interests," Aaron said coldly. "Oh, but we do," Victor replied, his gray eyes shifting to Helen with predatory focus. "We both seem quite interested in Ms. Laura here, though I must say my interest is purely professional. I'm fascinated by her resourcefulness, the way she's managed to transform her circumstances so dramatically in such a short time." Helen felt Aaron tense beside her, and she could practically feel the rage radiating from his body. Maya had shrunk back in her chair, her face white with terror as she realized the magnitude of what she had set in motion. "What do you want, Victor?" Aaron asked, his voice deadly quiet. "Simple," Victor said, pulling out his phone and swiping through several photos before holding it up for them to see. "I want you to step away from DeGroat Enterprises, resign as CEO, liquidate your holdings, and disappear from the Seattle business scene. In exchange, I'll forget about these interesting photographs I've acquired, and Ms. Laura can keep her son." Helen looked at the phone screen and felt her world collapse. The photos showed her and Aaron in intimate moments, kissing in his penthouse, holding hands in the rooftop garden, embracing in what appeared to be her office after hours. But it was the final photo that made her blood run cold. Zion sitting alone in her office while she was nowhere to be seen, with a timestamp that made it look like she had abandoned him for hours. "Those photos are taken out of context," Helen said, her voice shaking with rage and fear. "That last one, I was only gone for 5 minutes to use the restroom. Zion was never alone for more than—" "Context is everything, isn't it?" Victor interrupted smoothly. "And context can be interpreted in so many different ways. A judge might see a pattern of irresponsible behavior, bringing a child to inappropriate work environments, exposing him to adult situations, prioritizing romantic relationships over parental duties." Aaron moved so fast that Helen barely saw him before he had Victor pinned against the conference room wall, his forearm pressed against the other man's throat. "If you even think about touching that child—" "Aaron, stop!" Helen cried, afraid that violence would only make things worse. Victor's smile never wavered, even with Aaron's considerable strength holding him immobile. "Careful, old friend. Assault charges would look terrible in the custody hearing, though I suppose it would just prove my point about the dangerous influences in young Zion's life." Aaron released Victor with obvious reluctance, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You have 48 hours to get out of Seattle," he said, his voice low and deadly. "If you're not gone by then, I'll destroy you in ways you can't imagine." "Oh, Aaron," Victor said, straightening his expensive suit with theatrical calm. "I'm not going anywhere. In fact, I think Seattle is about to become much more interesting. Ms. Laura, you have a choice to make. Your son's future or your boyfriend's empire. Choose wisely." With that, Victor strode out of the conference room, leaving behind a silence so thick with tension and fear that Helen felt like she was suffocating. Maya was sobbing quietly in her chair, Aaron was staring at the door with murder in his eyes, and Helen was trying to process the fact that the life she had just begun to build was crumbling around her once again. But this time it wasn't just her own future at stake. This time Zion could be taken from her, and that was a loss she would never survive. Chapter 8. Love's Ultimate Test. The emergency board meeting convened at 6 a.m. on Friday morning, filling DeGroat Enterprises' executive conference room with an atmosphere so tense it was almost suffocating. Helen sat in Aaron's office, staring out at Elliott Bay through the floor-to-ceiling windows, while 20 floors below, Aaron fought for both their futures with a room full of investors who cared only about profit margins and quarterly returns. She hadn't slept in 36 hours. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Victor Russo's predatory smile and those damning photographs that could be twisted to destroy her relationship with Zion. Her son was safely at school, blissfully unaware that his entire world was hanging in the balance, and Helen was grateful for his innocence, even as it made her more desperate to protect it. Maya had disappeared after Victor's confrontation, leaving behind only a tearful apology and a promise to try to gather information about Victor's legal strategy. Helen didn't hold out much hope. Her sister was weak when it came to powerful men, and Victor Russo was nothing if not powerful. The conference room doors opened with a soft whoosh, and Helen turned to see Maria Rodriguez entering with a grave expression and a stack of legal documents that made Helen's stomach clench with dread. "The board meeting is about to conclude," Maria said quietly, setting the papers on Aaron's desk. "And Miss Laura, I need to prepare you for what's coming next." "Is it that bad?" Helen asked, though she could read the answer in Maria's troubled eyes. "Victor's legal team filed preliminary custody papers this morning," Maria replied, her voice gentle but firm. "They're claiming that your employment at DeGroat Enterprises constitutes an inappropriate relationship that puts Zion at risk. They have photos, witness statements from people claiming to have seen you neglect parental duties, and a psychiatric evaluation that paints you as emotionally unstable." Helen sank into Aaron's leather chair, her legs no longer able to support her weight. "A psychiatric evaluation? From who? I've never seen a psychiatrist." "It's fabricated," Maria said quickly. "Aaron's legal team is already working to have it thrown out, but Victor is playing dirty. He's using his connections to fast-track the case, claiming that Zion is in immediate danger." Before Helen could respond, the conference room doors burst open, and Aaron strode in, his face a mask of controlled fury and his blue eyes blazing with determination. Behind him trailed several board members who looked equal parts impressed and terrified by whatever had just transpired in their meeting. "Is it done?" Maria asked, though Helen could see she already knew the answer. "It's done," Aaron confirmed, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he had apparently just accomplished. "Ladies and gentlemen," he addressed the lingering board members, "I'll need those liquidation papers prepared within the hour, and I want Victor Russo to hear about this before lunch." Helen watched in confusion as the board members filed out, their expressions ranging from admiration to disbelief. When the room was finally empty except for Aaron, Maria, and herself, Helen found her voice. "What happened in there? What liquidation papers?" Aaron moved to his desk and pulled up a live news feed on his computer, turning the screen so Helen could see the breaking news banner that made her heart stop. DeGroat Enterprises. CEO liquidates half of business empire in unprecedented move. "Aaron, what did you do?" Helen whispered, her voice barely audible. "What I should have done the moment Victor Russo threatened you," Aaron replied, his voice fierce with protective determination. "I've liquidated 50% of my holdings and placed the proceeds, approximately $1 billion, into an untouchable trust fund with you and Zion as the sole beneficiaries." Helen stared at him in shock, unable to process the magnitude of what he was saying. "You did what?" "I made it impossible for Victor to claim you're with me for financial gain," Aaron explained, moving around the desk to kneel beside her chair. The trust is structured so that you receive the money regardless of our relationship status. If we never see each other again, it's still yours. If we get married tomorrow, it's still yours alone. Victor can't claim you're a gold digger when you're worth more than he is. Aaron, you can't just give away $1 billion, Helen protested, her voice rising with panic. That's your life's work, your security, your future. You're my future, Aaron interrupted, taking her hands in his and looking into her eyes with an intensity that took her breath away. Helen, listen to me very carefully. Money can be earned again. Businesses can be rebuilt. But you and Zion, you're irreplaceable. I would rather lose everything I own than lose you. Helen felt tears streaming down her face as she stared at this extraordinary man who had just sacrificed half his empire for her and her son. But what if we don't work out? What if this relationship doesn't last? You'll have given up everything for nothing. Aaron's hands tightened on hers, his voice rough with emotion. Even if you decide tomorrow that you can't be with me, even if you walk away and never look back, saving you and Zion from Victor's threats isn't nothing. It's everything. It's the most important thing I've ever done with my life. Maria cleared her throat softly, reminding them of her presence. There's more, she said gently. Aaron didn't just liquidate assets. He held a press conference. Helen looked between them in confusion. What kind of press conference? Aaron stood and pulled up another news feed, this one showing footage from 30 minutes earlier. On the screen, Aaron stood behind a podium in the building's main conference room, facing a crowd of reporters and cameras. His expression was calm and determined as he spoke into the microphones. Turn up the volume, Helen whispered. Aaron's voice filled the office. Ladies and gentlemen, I've called this press conference to address some recent attacks on my personal life and the life of someone very dear to me. Victor Russo, CEO of Russo Development, has launched a campaign of harassment and intimidation against a DeGroat Enterprises employee, a single mother who has done nothing but work hard and love her child fiercely. Helen watched in amazement as Aaron continued. Let me be clear about something. Helen Laura is not with me for my money. She doesn't need my money. As of this morning, I've placed $1 billion in an irrevocable trust fund in her name, making her one of the wealthiest women in Seattle. She could buy and sell Victor Russo 10 times over. The reporters' voices rose in a cacophony of questions, but Aaron held up his hand for silence. But more importantly, he continued, his voice carrying clearly over the noise, I want everyone to understand what kind of woman Helen Laura is. She's a brilliant creative professional who has already transformed our marketing strategies. She's a devoted mother who has sacrificed everything to give her son the best possible life, and she's the strongest, most honorable person I've ever met. Aaron paused, looking directly into the camera with an expression that made Helen's heart stop. Victor Russo believes he can manipulate me by threatening the woman I love. He's wrong. Helen Laura and her son mean more to me than every dollar I've ever earned, every property I've ever developed, every success I've ever achieved. They are my heart, my soul, my reason for living, and I will spend every resource at my disposal to protect them. The footage ended, leaving the office in stunned silence. Helen stared at the blank screen, unable to believe what she had just witnessed. Aaron had declared his love for her in front of the entire Seattle media, had made himself vulnerable in a way that no powerful businessman should ever do. You told the world you love me, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I told the world the truth, Aaron replied simply. I love you, Helen. I love your strength, your intelligence, your fierce devotion to Zion. I love the way you see beauty in storm clouds and find hope in impossible situations. I love everything about you, and I'm not ashamed of that. Helen stood on shaking legs, her emotions overwhelming her ability to think clearly. Aaron, This is insane. You've made yourself a target. Victor will come after you even harder now." "Let him try," Aaron said, his voice hard as steel. "I've been building my resources and my reputation for 15 years. Victor Russo thinks he can destroy me because he's never faced someone who has nothing left to lose. But he's wrong about that too. I have everything to lose. I have you and Zion, and that makes me more dangerous than he could ever imagine." Before Helen could respond, Aaron's phone buzzed with an urgent text. He glanced at it and smiled for the first time since Victor's appearance the day before. "That was my legal team," he said, his voice filled with satisfaction. "Apparently, Victor's custody filing has been withdrawn. Something about his legal team advising him that threatening a billionaire philanthropist's family might not play well with a family court judge." Helen felt her knees buckle with relief, and Aaron caught her before she could fall, pulling her against his chest and holding her tight while she sobbed with the release of 36 hours of terror and stress. "It's over?" she asked against his shoulder. "It's over," Aaron confirmed, his lips against her hair. Victor overplayed his hand. He thought he was dealing with a desperate woman and a love-struck fool. Instead, he got a family with unlimited resources and a man who will go to war for the people he loves. Helen pulled back to look into Aaron's eyes, seeing the love and determination there that had just moved mountains on her behalf. "I can't accept the money," she said quietly. $1 billion. It's too much. It changes everything." "It changes nothing," Aaron replied firmly. "You're still the same woman who stood in a storm protecting her child. You're still the same person who walked into my building with dignity and talent and transformed everything you touched. The money just ensures that no one can ever make you feel powerless again." Helen realized then that Aaron was right. The money wasn't about changing who she was. It was about making sure she never had to be vulnerable to people like Victor Russo again. It was about giving her the security to love without fear, to build a life without constantly looking over her shoulder for the next catastrophe. "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling both terrifying and inevitable. "I love you so much it scares me." Aaron's smile was brilliant and relieved, and so full of joy that Helen felt her heart swell with happiness. "Don't be scared," he murmured, cupping her face in his hands. "We're going to be extraordinary together. You, me, and Zion. We're going to build something beautiful." As Aaron's lips met hers in a kiss that tasted of promise and forever, Helen realized that sometimes the greatest storms cleared the way for the most beautiful skies. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, your guardian angel wore a business suit and loved you enough to move heaven and earth to keep you safe. Chapter 9. Soul's Surrender. That evening, as Seattle's skyline glittered beneath a canopy of stars, Helen stood outside Aaron's building with her heart pounding. Zion was safely staying overnight with Mrs. Chen and her grandson, an arrangement she'd made earlier that week, sensing this moment was inevitable. For the first time in years, she had an entire night free from motherhood's responsibilities. The doorman recognized her now, greeting her with a warm smile that spoke of Aaron's instructions to treat her like family. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt both eternal and impossibly brief, her reflection in the mirrored walls showing a woman transformed by love and possibility. She wore a simple burgundy dress that hugged her curves and made her skin glow, paired with heels that gave her confidence and a smile that couldn't be contained. Aaron opened the door before she could knock, as if he had been watching for her arrival. He looked devastatingly handsome in dark jeans and a white shirt, with the sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms, his hair slightly mussed, and his blue eyes dark with an intensity that made her stomach flutter with anticipation. "You came," he said softly, the same words he had spoken their first night together, but now they carried the weight of everything they had survived and overcome. "I'll always come to you," Helen replied, stepping into his arms as naturally as breathing. Always. The kiss that followed was different from their previous encounters, deeper, more certain, charged with the knowledge that all barriers between them had finally fallen away. Aaron's hands tangled in her hair as he backed her against the closed door, his mouth moving over hers with a hunger that spoke of weeks of restraint, finally breaking free. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "I love you so much it overwhelms me." "Don't be overwhelmed," Helen whispered, her hands exploring his chest through the soft cotton of his shirt. "Be with me. Really with me." Aaron pulled back to look into her eyes, searching for any hint of uncertainty or doubt. "Are you sure?" "We don't have to rush anything. We have all the time in the world now." Helen's answer was to rise on her tiptoes and claim his mouth again, pouring all her love and trust and desire into the kiss until Aaron groaned against her lips and lifted her into his arms with effortless strength. She wrapped her legs around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of his body against hers as he carried her toward his bedroom. The master suite was a testament to masculine elegance, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city lights and a king-sized bed that dominated the space. Aaron set her down gently beside the bed, his hands framing her face with infinite tenderness. "You're so beautiful," he breathed, his thumbs tracing the high arch of her cheekbones. "Not just physically, though God knows you take my breath away, but your soul, your heart, your strength. Everything about you is magnificent." Helen felt tears prick her eyes at the raw honesty in his voice. No one had ever spoken to her the way Aaron did, as if she were precious and powerful and worthy of devotion. "You make me feel like I can be anything," she whispered, "like I deserve to be loved completely." "You do," Aaron said fiercely. "You deserve everything good in this world, and I want to spend my life giving it to you." Their kisses became more urgent then, hands roaming and exploring, with the desperate need of lovers who had waited too long to truly touch each other. Aaron's fingers found the zipper at the back of Helen's dress, sliding it down with agonizing slowness, while his mouth traced fire along her neck and collarbone. "Tell me what you want," he murmured against her skin, his voice rough with barely controlled desire. "You," Helen gasped, her head falling back as Aaron's lips found the sensitive spot where her neck met her shoulder. "Everything. All of you." The burgundy dress pooled at her feet, leaving Helen in black lace that made Aaron's breath catch in his throat. She had chosen the lingerie carefully, wanting to feel beautiful and confident for this moment, and the look in Aaron's eyes told her she had succeeded beyond her wildest dreams. "My God," he whispered, his hands skimming over her curves with reverent appreciation. "You're perfect. Absolutely perfect." Helen's fingers worked at the buttons of his shirt with trembling urgency, desperate to feel his skin against hers. When the white cotton finally fell away, she pressed her palms against the hard planes of his chest, marveling at the way his muscles jumped under her touch. They moved together in a dance as old as time, hands and mouths exploring with increasing passion as the last barriers between them fell away. Aaron worshipped every inch of Helen's body with his lips and hands, treating her like a goddess deserving of devotion, while Helen discovered the profound joy of giving herself completely to a man who loved her beyond reason. When Aaron finally joined with her, their eyes locked in a connection that went far deeper than physical pleasure. This was a claiming, a surrender, a promise of forever sealed in the most intimate way possible. Helen had never felt so complete, so perfectly matched, so absolutely loved. "I love you," Aaron gasped against her neck as they moved together in perfect rhythm. "My heart, my soul, my everything. It's all yours. Forever," Helen promised, her voice breaking with the intensity of her emotions. "Forever and always." Their climax was shattering in its intensity, leaving them both breathless and trembling in each other's arms as aftershocks of pleasure rippled through their joined bodies. Aaron collapsed beside Helen, immediately pulling her against his chest so that she could feel the rapid beating of his heart against her cheek. "That was," Aaron began, then stopped, apparently unable to find words adequate to describe what they had just shared. "I know," Helen whispered, pressing soft kisses against his chest. "I felt it too." They lay in comfortable silence for long minutes, watching the city lights twinkle beyond the windows while their breathing slowly returned to normal. Helen traced lazy patterns on Aaron's chest with her fingertips, marveling at how right this felt, how perfectly she fit against his side. "What happens now?" she asked quietly, voicing the question that had been hovering at the edges of her consciousness. "Now we build a life together," Aaron replied, his arms tightening around her. "You, me, and Zion. We create something beautiful and lasting and strong enough to weather any storm." Helen lifted her head to look at him, seeing the future reflected in his blue eyes, a future full of love and laughter, and the kind of security she had never dared to imagine. "What about your business? You sacrificed so much today." "I sacrificed nothing," Aaron interrupted, rolling over to hover above her, his expression intense. "I invested in what matters most. The business will recover, the money will come back, but this, us, this is irreplaceable." Helen reached up to trace the strong line of his jaw, her heart so full of love it felt like it might burst. "I never thought I could have this," she admitted. "A love like this, a man like you. I thought fairy tales were for other people." "This isn't a fairy tale," Aaron said, pressing gentle kisses to her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "This is real life, and it's going to be messy and complicated and challenging sometimes. But it's also going to be extraordinary, because we're going to face it together." As if to prove his point, Aaron's phone buzzed on the nightstand with what was undoubtedly another crisis requiring his attention. He glanced at it, then deliberately turned it face down and returned his focus to Helen. "Whatever it is can wait," he said firmly. "Right now, the only thing that matters is you." Helen felt a surge of gratitude so intense it took her breath away. This man had already given up billions for her, had declared his love to the world, had made himself vulnerable in ways that most powerful men never would. And now he was choosing her over his business obligations, proving once again that she truly was his priority. "I love you, Aaron de Groot," she whispered, pulling his head down for another kiss. "I love your strength, your generosity, your fierce protectiveness. I love the way you see the best in people and fight for what you believe in. I love you with every piece of my heart." "And I love you, Helen Laura," Aaron replied, his voice thick with emotion. "My brave, beautiful, extraordinary woman. You saved me in ways you don't even realize. You gave me a reason to use my success for something meaningful." As they made love again, slower and more tender this time, Helen realized that their story wasn't ending. It was just beginning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to build the life they both wanted. There would be Zion to consider, a relationship to navigate, a future to plan together. But tonight, in the safety of Aaron's arms, with the city sparkling below them like a promise of infinite possibility, Helen Laura finally understood what it meant to be completely, utterly, perfectly loved. And for the first time in her life, she dared to believe that happiness wasn't just for other people. It was for her too. The storm that had brought them together had finally passed, leaving in its wake the most beautiful, clear sky either of them had ever seen. Chapter 10. When Two Hearts Become One. 6 months after Victor's defeat, Helen stood in her walk-in closet, adjusting the burgundy silk dress that hugged her curves. The diamond earrings Aaron had given her sparkled in the afternoon light. Behind her, Zion struggled with his tie, the same knot Aaron had patiently taught him. "Mama, do I look okay?" Zion asked, his 8-year-old voice nervous with excitement. Aaron said this dinner is very important. Helen turned to fix his tie, her heart swelling as she looked at her son. In these months with Aaron, Zion had blossomed, more confident, secure, absolutely devoted to the man who'd become his hero. "You look incredibly handsome," Helen assured him. "And yes, this dinner is very special." 40 floors below, Aaron paced the rooftop garden he'd transformed into a fairy tale. String lights twinkled like captured stars, white roses formed an arch framing Elliott Bay, and exotic orchids, Helen's favorites, glowed in crystal vases. In his jacket pocket, a velvet box held the emerald-cut diamond he'd designed for her, surrounded by smaller stones forming a star, symbolic of the light she'd brought to his darkness. "Mr. de Groot?" Maria Rodriguez appeared beside him, smiling. "Everything's ready. The photographer's hidden, the musician's here, and Zion knows his role." Aaron nodded, though his heart raced like a teenager's. He'd conquered boardrooms and billion-dollar deals, but asking Helen to marry him terrified him. "What if she says no?" he whispered. Maria laughed gently. "That woman looks at you like you hung every star in the sky. She won't say no." The elevator opened, revealing Helen and Zion dressed beautifully. Helen gasped at the transformed rooftop, her hand flying to her mouth as tears sparkled in her eyes. "Aaron," she breathed, "this is magical." "You said you dreamed of painting storm clouds," Aaron said, moving toward her. "I thought we should create something beautiful where our storm began." They dined as the sun painted the sky in pink and gold. Zion chattered excitedly about summer plans, sailing lessons with Aaron, camps Aaron had arranged. Helen watched her son's animated face, realizing he'd found not just a father figure, but a true parent who loved him unconditionally. "Zion," Aaron said as plates were cleared, "remember our special plan?" Zion's eyes went wide. "Yes. Can I do it now?" Helen looked between them, her pulse quickening. "What plan?" Aaron knelt beside her chair, taking her hands as his blue eyes blazed with love. "Helen, Laura, 6 months ago you changed everything. You showed me what it meant to love someone more than success, more than anything." "Aaron," Helen whispered, tears flowing. "You made me want to be worthy of the love you show Zion," Aaron continued, his voice rough with emotion. "Will you marry me? Will you let me love you both forever?" The ring he produced was breathtaking, a star of diamonds that caught the sunset like captured fire. "It's shaped like a star," Aaron explained softly, "because you're the light that guided me home." "Yes," Zion shouted, jumping up with a small wrapped box. "Mama, say yes. And Aaron, I have something for you." Helen was laughing and crying as Aaron slipped the perfect ring onto her finger. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Aaron de Groot, I will marry you." Aaron swept her into his arms, spinning her as she laughed with pure joy. When he set her down, Zion thrust his gift forward. "This is for you, Mama and I picked it together." Inside was a gold chain with a laminated pendant, Zion's drawing of their family holding hands under a bright sun. "Now you're really part of our family," Zion declared solemnly as he fastened the chain around Aaron's neck. "Mama said families wear each other close to their hearts." Aaron knelt to Zion's level, pulling him into a fierce hug. "I love you, son." "I love you too, Dad," Zion replied naturally. The word "Dad" broke something open in Aaron's chest. When he stood, Helen was watching with such profound love that Aaron felt humbled. As twilight embraced Seattle, they stood together at the garden's edge, Helen nestled against Aaron's side, his arm around her waist, while Zion leaned against them both with complete security. 3 months later, Helen walked down a chapel aisle in ivory silk and lace, Zion proudly escorting her toward Aaron, who stood waiting in charcoal gray, his eyes bright with tears, his smile tender and proud. When Helen reached him and Zion placed her hand in Aaron's, they formed a circle of love that blessed everyone present. Their vows spoke of romantic love and chosen family. Aaron promised to love Helen completely and be the father Zion deserved. Helen promised to trust their love and build a worthy future together. But Zion provided the moment that left everyone in tears, stepping forward when the officiant asked if anyone had words to add. "Aaron is the best dad ever," Zion announced clearly. "He helps with homework and makes Mama laugh every day, and Mama is the strongest, most beautiful Mama in the world. So I'm really glad they found each other in that storm, because now we're a real family." When Aaron and Helen kissed as husband and wife, the applause was thunderous. Their first dance was to soft jazz, but their dance with Zion, all three swaying together, moved their guests to tears. Later that evening, on the balcony of their honeymoon suite, Helen marveled at their journey. "Do you remember what you told me that first night?" Aaron asked, holding her close as city lights twinkled below. "I told Zion we would survive," Helen replied softly, "that we would be stronger than they thought." "You were right," Aaron murmured, "but I don't think either of us imagined we would become this strong, this happy." Helen turned in his arms, studying her new husband's face. "I love you, Aaron de Groot." "And I love you, Helen de Groot," he replied, her new name making them both smile. "My wife, my heart, my forever," as they kissed under the stars, with Zion's laughter drifting from inside where he was video calling Mrs. Chen about the wedding. Helen realized that fairy tales weren't just for other people. Sometimes storms cleared the way for the most beautiful sunshine, and sometimes love found you in the most unexpected places and transformed your entire world.